quite possibly the worst way to kill yourself. And then we take a look at some intriguing stories of near-death experiences. But for these people, there is no tunnel of light or loved ones waving at them. No. These people, when they died, went to hell. Today on Dead Rabbit Radio. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Dead Rabbit Radio. I'm your host, Jason Carpenter. I'm having a great day. I hope you guys are having a great day too. You want to know what's funny? You guys know how sick I was the other day when I was recording that episode? Well, I was really sick, but a friend of mine had invited me to do something I had never done before. And I was sick, and I was having that heart trouble, and I did it. I went to a martial arts studio and took a little bit of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Spent a training session there, rolled around on the ground, trained on how to get up, and I'm going to enroll. I'm going to enroll, and I'm going to do some Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Basically, I'm confirming my transformation into Joe Rogan at this point. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you, because I may do it for a month, and it may just not be for me. I'm super sore already, but I really want to do something even more active. I already lift weights and I walk, but I want to do something more to lose weight. Lifting weights is just for strength for me. Do something, guys. I get emails from a lot of you guys, and I know that a lot of you guys are just like me. We got to do stuff. Get out of that rut. If you feel like things aren't working out for you, if you feel things are just you're just threading through life. I don't know if that's even an analogy, but if you feel like you're just kind of doing the paces through life, do something different. Do something that you never would have done before, because that got me, as sick as I was, down to this martial arts studio where I met a bunch of people that I never would have met otherwise. I rolled around on the floor. I learned a bunch of stuff, just technique. I didn't actually wrestle anybody that day because I wasn't feeling good, but it was a great start to maybe something, again, I do for a month and then go, it's not for me. It's too much for my body. Or it may be something that I do for a year or 2 years. Who knows? But just do stuff. Just do stuff. Let's go ahead and get started with our first story here, guys. Join me on this trip to Bolivia. Here, grab my hand. Grab my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu infused strength hand. Dude, my abs hurt. I know I have abs underneath all of the flab, but they hurt. Like, I can't see them, and they hurt so bad, because they were training me on how to fall down. They go, you got to be able to get up quickly. You got to be able to spin around on your stomach. Not on your stomach. Spin around on your back. Do all sorts of stuff. But first, you got to learn how to not get knocked unconscious when you get knocked down. So that was pretty much the whole night, was me learning how to fall and get back up. So my abs are killing me. Where was I going? Oh, yeah. So we're going to Bolivia. Hold my hand. You're like, Jason, your grip is so strong, and you've only been training for 1 day. I was like, I know, but I can't control my strength anymore, and I lift you up to... Why are we holding hands? It's not like you were hanging out of the helicopter. I'm just patting you on the back now. You're like, oh, you're leaving bruises, Jason. You're so strong. We get in the helicopter. We're flying away to Bolivia. We're going back to the year 2011, and this is the month of November, in or near the town of Rosario del Llata. And there's this little canoe, this little boat going down the river. And in the canoe is totally forgot. Actually, sorry, I totally forgot we have a new Patreon subscriber. And this is a dope name, Narlos. Narlos, thank you so much for supporting the show. Really, really appreciate it. I appreciate it so much that this unnamed kid in this canoe is now named Narlos. So this is a true story. Narlos did not actually do this. But in real life, there was an unnamed 18-year-old boy in a canoe going down the river. So Narlos is sitting there, and we're like, hey, Narlos, you're not going to do anything stupid, are you? And he's like, oh, he's super sad. We're like, oh no, why did you donate this episode? He's like, I don't know, I'm so sad. And he jumps out of the boat. And he's splashing around in the water. So you're looking at me and you're like, are we going to throw a ladder off? Throw a ladder out of the carpenter copter to save him? And I'm like, well, I'd want to because I enjoy that he supports the show, but then we will interfere with the timeline. And Gnarless is like, no, interfere with the timeline, because what happened in real life is a young man was on a rowboat, and he jumps off. He doesn't, from what people can gather, he didn't fall off, he wasn't pushed off, he jumped off into the water. And you're thinking, well, okay, so he jumped into the water to go swimming, but you said this was like a suicide story, so I'm guessing he jumped into the water to drown. He jumped into the water to be eaten to death by piranhas. And this is why they think it's suicide. Because everyone knows that this river is infested with piranhas, especially this area, and this kid had been fishing here his whole life. So, he jumped into the water, and immediately piranhas attack him. Now, that's horrifying. That might be the worst way to kill yourself. I think people who kill themselves, like, anything involving animals, I think is really rough. Jumping into a zoo, letting alligators eat you, poking snakes with big old sticks, laughing at monkeys, any of that stuff. You're basically asking for a death designed by evolution to be vicious. So he jumps into the water and starts getting eaten by fish. Now, almost immediately, he regrets this, and he gets rescued, but I guess that's a misnomer. He doesn't get rescued. His body gets recovered. He's still alive, and they throw him on a boat, and he bleeds to death. So what I found out, actually, was a lot of piranha stuff. I found some piranha facts. I'll go over them very briefly, because people know the basic ones. They eat the flesh off your bones, and then they're a little tiny. I guess I should start with what they are, in case you're like, what's a piranha? I'm from an alien planet. A piranha is a little fish dude who goes from like 5 to 15 inches. So pretty big fish. And they swim in packs, and they basically eat your flesh off your bones, your flesh and your muscles and all this stuff. So those cartoons were like Bugs Bunny like stands in the river, and then he's like, and then I don't know if that actually happened in a Bugs Bunny cartoon, but cartoons where characters go in the water, and then they walk out of the water, and there's just bones for legs. It's a sight gag, basically. It's piranhas eating all the flesh and the meat off of them. But I didn't know this. So that's basic piranha stuff. Everyone should know this. I didn't know this. One, they go for the face. So what happens is cows and stuff, when they're like drinking from the river, they're walking up to the river, taking a big drink, jaguars. Do snakes drink water, right? Like snakes have to drink water. How do they drink water? Do they do like a cat and stick their tongue in and take little droplets of water? That seems inefficient. It seems inefficient for cats too, but do they gulp water down? They have every living thing, I believe, other than like those weirdo, gross microorganisms that live in volcanoes, everything needs water. How does a snake drink? Like an anaconda up in a tree. Does it lift its head up when it rains? Does it absorb? Actually, this might be it. I wonder if it absorbs water through its skin. Now, I know they're not plants. I know that just because they look like a plant and they're green and they're long does not mean they are plants. But I don't know how a snake drinks water. That really has nothing to do with the story, but I do know that piranhas eat snakes. Piranhas eat jaguars. Piranhas eat cows. Anything in the water. And what happens is when people are drinking, not necessarily people, but when animals are drinking out of the water, the fish will attack their face first, and then the creature will be like, and then fall in the water, and the fish will finish them off. So that's pretty gross. They go straight for the eyeballs. They eat you up. Now, I imagine if someone started biting me on the face, I think I would back up. I don't think I'd be like, I don't think I would fall towards their mouths. So if I was drinking out of the river, if I was on all fours drinking out of the river, and a fish bit me, I would not then go, oh no, and then jump into the river. I don't understand. Like, I know cows are stupid, but they're not that stupid. But apparently, like, getting bit on the face, I guess having a 15-inch fish, like 10 of them on your face, may make you tumble forward. But again, I just don't see the logic in it. But apparently, regardless of whether or not I see the logic in it, it works. These creatures have evolved over millions of years to do this. I'm like tut-tutting nature. Like, that doesn't make sense. The other thing is that I found out about piranhas is not only do they go for your face, they're one of the very few fishes, if not the only, there might be another one out there, but they're one of the only few fish that make noise. They scream while they are eating you. They let off this little sonic, like, chirp thing that you can hear. You can actively hear as they're attacking you. So while you're underwater and they're eating your face and you're trying to scream, but you're getting mouthfuls of gross river water, or maybe crystal blue river water, I don't know. And they're biting, because they take little bites, they bite off just a piece of your nostril, and another one takes a bite, like, right of your iris. You're like, oh no, I need that to see. And then it swims into your eyeball and it starts eating, like, the inside of your brain. While they're doing all of that stuff, you hear them going, ee, 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 ee. I don't know if that's the exact noise they make, but whatever it is, it's still terrifying that a fish is screaming at you while it's eating your face off. And most people don't die from being eaten. They die from bleeding to death. So it's a very, very slow death. So this poor dude, aka Narlos, sorry that you decided to go this way. I'm curious of why they think it was suicide, though. Like, why they didn't think he just jumped out of the boat. Which makes me think there's some witnesses to it. But this was reported in the actual newspaper. Let me back up. This was reported in the Daily Mail, which is kind of tabloidish over in the UK. But that is a creepy way to go. Now we're going to rescue Narlos. He's just a skeleton sitting in the back of the carpenter copter for the rest of the episode. We are flying to a hospital. A hospital in any town, USA. We land on their helipad on the roof, and we're getting out. And there's these ambulance helicopters flying around. They're like, move it. We got these heart transplants. We're like, what? We can't hear you. They're throwing hearts at us. They're throwing donated hearts at us. We're like, ah. We now we go into the hospital. We're inside the hospital. Now, this story was inspired by Crispy Bacon. Actually, he's also a Patreon subscriber. This episode I was going to do a couple episodes back, but because I almost died, and I didn't almost die, but because I had that heart thing and it was just weird and I had to sit in hospital for a long time, I didn't want to do this episode then. But we're doing it now. We're doing it. So, we're in this hospital. Now, we're going to walk around and we're going to go to a doctor. He's sitting there, he's filling stuff out, and we're like, hey, sir, we want to talk to you about near-death experiences. And he turns around and he's like, that is perfect, because most of my patients almost die all the time. I'm actually the best doctor if you want to talk about people who die and then come back to life. Let's go to my office. And we're like, oh, okay, this is great. So this is what we learn about near-death experiences. And I guess I actually should start with what the common thing is about near-death experiences. Near-death experience is where somebody dies and comes back to life. Now, normally, almost all the time, actually, they report a tunnel of light or loved ones showing up and gently easing them over to the other side. That's a very, very typical near-death experience story. I got hit by a car, and the next thing I know, my great uncle who died 10 years ago, who I really, really loved, was standing there along with some other people that I didn't recognize. And they said, it's not your time to come. And it was this beautiful, peaceful place. And then I woke up, I was in the hospital room. And when I told my mom about it, she said, oh, those people you described, that was my brother who died before you were born and da-da-da. I made that story up, but that is that you couldn't tell it was made up. That's very typical of a near-death experience story. But not all of them are good. They've done tons of studies on near-death experiences because they happen quite a lot. It's not rare. And it's something that the scientific community, the medical community, is interested in finding out. Ghosts and Bigfoot and Ghosts and Bigfoot are, for the most part, considered wacky beliefs that science doesn't really take seriously. UFOs would be relegated to that, except for the fact that governments want to know what's in their airspace. Governments do not care what's in their forest because they know there's not a Bigfoot there or a giant monster running around or a Mothman. A government agency knows that for the most part. Now, when you have a UFO flying around, you want to know what it is. Either you want to know that it's totally fake and it's something somebody saw because they drank too much moonshine, or it is swamp gas, or Venus is unusually bright, or somebody is flying an object in your airspace. You got to figure out what it is. But Pentagon doesn't have a ghost division. They don't really care about that, what people think about ghosts, if Mary Queen of Scots is really floating around downtown 7-Eleven. But because near-death experiences happen all the time, the medical community wants to know what they are. Now, generally, the consensus is that when you die, your body's releasing a bunch of, I'm going to use the wrong word here, but basically like chemicals, drugs, whatever you want to call it, DMT, whatever. It's flooding your brain with this stuff to make the process of dying more peaceful, or basically to calm you down in your last moments, and that chemical rush is what we're seeing, and that's why there's numerous things like the Tunnel of Light that carry over. Now, people who argue that the near-death experience is actually something real go, well then how did I see my uncle show up, blah, 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 and it's this back and forth thing. There's some people who believe that it's 100% a legit crossing over, you're seeing the other side. And other people say, no, it's just a rush of chemicals. And again, there have been tons of studies done, and both sides have their own sets of studies they use. But that's just kind of an overview for near-death experiences. We're going to talk today about the rare ones. So you have the good, not near-death experiences. And then we have some that are called the void. The eternal void is the terminology. So there have been a ton, like I said, a ton of papers done on this stuff. So all this stuff is basically considered HIPAA, considered they're not releasing the person's a name for who was involved in this study. But people went around and they interviewed people who had near-death experiences, and they were cataloging good ones, and then the void, and then what they call hell death experiences. Here's some of the void ones. I'm going to read these from the paper. A woman in childbirth found herself abruptly flying over the hospital and into deep, empty space. A group of circular entities, I wonder if that means they're just like balls, just a bunch of balls floating around you. A group of circular entities, and this one's actually really creepy. This is an interesting one to start off on, because this one's pretty creepy. A group of circular entities informed her she never existed, that she had been allowed to imagine her life, but it was a joke. She was not real. She argued with facts about her life and descriptions of Earth. No, they said. None of that had ever been real. This is all there was. She was left alone in space. Now, she obviously comes back to life. She died during childbirth. She comes back to life. That would be a hard thing to come back from. If you imagine that you died, and you had this vision that you're just kind of floating there, and you're told, oh, none of it was real. It was all fake. This is what awaits you, the loneliness of a pitch black void. And not only that, you get to know that all of your actions were just your imagination. You were a dream of your own making, and now sit in the void forever. And think about the fact that everyone you loved never even existed. Creepy. This is going to be the rest of the episode, by the way. This is going to be the rest of the episode, so if you find that creepy, it's probably only going to get worse from here. Here's another one. And this woman, it was interesting, this woman actually also died during childbirth, came back to life. Spoiler alert. So this woman, when she dies, it does start off as a good near-death experience. It starts off very, very peaceful. But then we move to this. It was no longer a peaceful feeling. It had become pure hell. I had become a light out in the heavens, and I was screaming, but no sound was going forth. It was worse than any nightmare. I was spinning around, and I realized that this was eternity. This was what forever was going to be. I felt the aloneness, the emptiness of space, the vastness of the universe, except for me, a mere ball of light, screaming. I mean, I figure if you're in hell and you're burning, at least like there's other people burning, you can share in the misery. Maybe every so often you can get together, have a little meeting. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Oh man, I'm so tired of being burned. But that would be preferable to simply existing for eternity, knowing you exist, but not being able to interact with anything, being completely separated from everything. Here's another one. And so this next one was a woman who actually attempted suicide. And one of the things they looked at, they said, Do people who commit suicide tend to have a bad near-death experience? And this is what they figured out. This is the they did multiple studies on this. A bad near-death experience can affect anybody of any religious background. You can be a devout Christian, you can be an atheist. It doesn't, what your background is does not determine what type of near-death experience you do. When they look at people who committed suicide, 55% of all the void experiences, because they're rare to begin with, but 55% of all experiences like we're discussing, the void, happened with people who committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide. And then 18% of all hellish experiences came from people who attempted suicide. Now, hellish experiences, when you look at the full body of work for near-death experiences, only make up about like 1 to 5%. Some people say it's as high as 15%, but other people are like, no, that's too high. So 1 to 5% of all near-death experiences involve a hellish experience. And out of that, 18% of those are from people who attempted to commit suicide. So they do think that people who attempt to commit suicide tend to have darker near-death experiences. But people say, well, that's explainable because people who commit suicide tend not to be in the best mind state to begin with. Sorry, guys. It's a super dark episode. We're going to go back to this woman who attempted to commit suicide. Here's her story. She tries to kill herself, and then she felt herself begin to get sucked into a void. And here's her quote. I was being drawn into this dark abyss, or tunnel, or void. I was not aware of my body as I know it. I was terrified. This is an interesting part of this, too. So this woman expected that when she died, she's most likely an atheist or agnostic, when she died, that she would slip into nothingness, oblivion. I obviously believe that when you die, something happens to your soul. Heaven or hell, or I don't know the specifics, but I believe there's a soul that exists beyond biological death. There are a lot of people who don't believe that. So she is one of those people. She believes that when she's died, she'll go into oblivion. Let's finish her quote here. I had expected nothingness. I expected the big sleep. I expected oblivion. And I found now that I was going to another plane. And it frightened me. I wanted nothingness. But this force was pulling me somewhere I didn't want to go. But I never got beyond the fog. This one was funny. This one, not necessarily super funny, but I just like, again, this all comes out of like medical journals, all this stuff. So this is all the lead-in we get for this one. A man who was attacked by a hitchhiker felt himself rise out of his body. I want to know what led up to this. Like, was he walking down the street and a hitchhiker jumped up, knocked him over the head, tried stealing his clothes? Did he pick up a hitchhiker and get a wrench to the side of the head as he was driving? Guess it doesn't matter. I just find how often as much fun as I make fun of hitchhikers and drifters and stuff like that, it's very rare that I actually encounter a story where they're attacking people. But I love that. So a man who was attacked by a hitchhiker felt himself rise out of his body. And here's the quote. I suddenly was surrounded by total blackness, floating in nothing but black space, with no up, no down, left or right. What seemed like an eternity went by. I fully lived it in this misery. I was only allowed to think and reflect. So all of these void experiences, the consciousness survives, and they're floating in nothingness. And floating, I think when you picture floating, you picture like a human, like Dr. Manhattan or Superman flying through space, but they don't even have a form. It's just a mind separated from everything in this void, which is quite terrifying to me. It may not be to you, but I think it's quite terrifying. But now, let's get to the bad stuff. Let's get to the hellish versions here, the hellish stories here. Now, they are considered the most rare of near-death experiences. Most people do not suffer from near-death experiences that are this bad. And even in this, there's actually a subset of them called judging experiences, which are incredibly rare. And that's where you die and you feel like you're being judged for something, and you did something wrong. Like, there are the life reviews where people will die and they'll look back on their life, but a lot of times there have been stories of people who have had near-death experiences that they'll see the events of their past lives, and they'll live out each event as let's say you cheated on your boyfriend, and you're dying, and you would relive that experience, and you would be your boyfriend in that experience, and you would sense his loss and confusion and trying to figure things out. And people who have come, and they felt kind of like they were being judged, but when they came out and they lived through those experiences and came back to life, it gave them a greater sense of empathy, because they saw all the bad stuff they'd done in their life, and they were the person that the bad thing had happened to. They come out of it, they're feeling great. There are ones where they actually feel like they're being judged for every negative thing they've done, but in the end, the scales they feel are weighed in their favor. Like, yes, they did bad things, but when the scales are finally weighed, they are a good person. The rarest form of near-death experience, and I don't even think I have an example of it, it's that rare, and we'll get to them, we'll see, but is being judged and being told you are garbage. Like, when we weigh the scales of life, you actually failed. Those near-death experiences do happen, but it's the single rarest near-death experience. Even the ones where they're being judged tend to be positive. So let's look at some of these, though, near-death experiences where people believe they passed the void and went into hell. Here's one. A man in heart failure felt himself falling into the depths of the earth. At the bottom was set high, rusty gates, which he perceived as the gates of hell. Panic-stricken, he managed to scramble back up to the daylight. Now, what's interesting about some of these, imagine we're in the year 6000 BC, or 10,000 BC, and you could be in Israel, you could be in the middle of Bolivia, you could be a Siberian dude, you could be a Native American. Or basically just native, because it wasn't America back then. If you died and you had a near-death experience like that, and because they're so rare, you might be the first human to get knocked off your donkey, and you fall down, you hit your head, and you feel your soul go, and you're flying through the earth, and you get to the middle of earth, and you see these rusty gates, and you have no context, because you don't know what hell is, you don't know what the gate visual is, and you climb your way back up to the sunlight, and then next thing you know, you're in a teepee or a hut or whatever. That would cause the creation of hell. If it is a chemical thing that causes these near-death experiences, it explains why we have the concept of heaven and hell to begin with. If this is 100% biological chemicals being pushed into your brain, it would explain why people believe in things like pearly white gates and your loved ones waiting for you in the afterlife and all of these. I don't want to use the term myths because I believe in them, but I'm going to use the word myths, the myths about the afterlife for both heaven and hell. These next ones I'm going to read to you too. If there was no context for religion and you died and you went to a shaman, there wouldn't even be shaman. You died and people go, whoa, you fell off that donkey, Mr. Native man, and you got your head bashed in, but you survived. What happened? And he goes, well, I went to the middle of the earth and there was this horrible place. And that's how stories get started. You would basically be considered they're like, okay, we're going to start calling you Mr. Shaman now. You defied death. And you had a vision of this would explain a lot of why we have visions of the afterlife. Because people dying and coming back and telling these stories 6,000, 10,000 years ago. Because people were dying, and it was a lot more rare back then, too. Because usually you just died back then. Some guy hit you on the head with a club, there was no emergency room to take you with. Your brains just came out. So, it would explain why we have these visions of what heaven and hell is. Let's look at some more of these. Here's a woman who died. A woman was being escorted through a frighteningly desolate landscape and saw a group of wandering spirits. They looked lost and in pain, but her guide indicated she was not allowed to help them. That's all we have from this woman's story. We don't know how it started, but just from the context, she's walking through hell. I love that term, frighteningly, I can't say that word right, but frighteningly desolate landscape. Again, the idea of a void. the idea of absence of God. It's not like she's looking and she's seeing mountain ranges in the distance. There's just nothingness. You're walking on a plane of nothingness, and she sees a group of people wandering by, and the guide's like, they're on their own journey now. Creepy. They're also lost, but again, not the loneliness of the void, but definitely think good things aren't happening here. Here's another one. An atheistic university professor with an intestinal rupture experience. This one's funny, actually. Now, and what's funny is this atheistic university professor actually ended up becoming a minister. And we see a lot of people who previously weren't religious who have these near-death experiences turn to religion afterwards, but not all of them. Some of them go, that was interesting. I think it was a chemical reaction, so I'm not going to put any weight in it. I'm not going to change my life because of it. Generally, the bad ones, people would tend to reevaluate their life, but even then, not all the time. And a creepy thing is there are times where people have died once, had a good near-death experience, the tunnel of light, their loved ones waving at them. There was a guy who the next time he almost died, which is just bad luck at that point, he had an experience that was described as, quote, he was attacked by gigantic, sinister, threatening, geometric forms, leaving him with a deep-seated pessimism and terror of dying. So just because you have one doesn't mean you can't have the other. And you would have to reevaluate your life. Like, what had you done differently? If you believe that this is some sort of spiritual thing, what did you do differently that caused the good one versus now being attacked by a bunch of pentagrams? Anyways, the atheistic university professor, we'll go back to this one, with an intestinal rupture, experienced being maliciously pinched. So that's not all. I'm going to finish it. But he dies, and he just feels these fingers just pinching his skin. Pinch, pinch, pinch. The creature's not making the noise, but just being pinched. And you figure at first you'd be like, ow, stop it. Ow, ow. But then each pinch dug deeper into the flesh and began just tearing flesh and muscle tissues away and just eventually eviscerated, destroyed, obliterated this man's body. And then he comes back to life. That freaked him out. As I think it would anybody. Here's one. We got two more I want to cover here. Here's one. A woman who committed suicide. Attempted to commit suicide. Right after she does the deed. It doesn't say how it was. It doesn't really matter. But she felt her body just immediately begin to slide into the ocean. Now, I'm assuming she didn't do it on a boat. I'm assuming that it was. That's why I think it's a little more important to know what happened here. But we can still go on with it. I'm assuming that, let's just say that she hung herself or shot herself or something like that. She immediately feels herself move through our reality into a cold, dark, watery environment. That's what the paper uses here. And here's her quote. When I reached the bottom, it resembled the entrance to a cave. With what looked like webs hanging, I heard cries, wails, moans, and the gnashing of teeth. I saw these beings that resembled humans with the shape of a head and body, but they were ugly and grotesque. They were frightening and sounded like they were tormented in agony. So again, we have a story of someone submerging, going underneath the earth. And again, it could be because people think that hell is underground. It could be, if this is biological, there could be some weird mechanism to it. It may be the idea that whatever realm, if there is a hell realm or dimension, it is, quote unquote, underneath our reality. And the term gnashing of teeth is actually in the Bible. So again, you could say, well, that's proof that the Bible's right about what hell is, or parts of the Bible is right about what hell is, because there's a lot of disagreement about what hell actually is, even among biblical scholars. Or it could be that this is a woman who had heard that phrase before and was expecting that in the back of her head. So again, near-death experiences are, how much of them are our expectations of what happened after we die versus actual things that exist after we die. That the reason why religions believe in them is because people have come back and told them these stories. But our last story, we're going to wrap this up, goes all about expectations. It goes all about what people expect to be there after we die. And I think that is why this one's the creepiest. It's because if you're the one where the woman thought she was just going to disappear into the void, and it turns out she would fly through just a fog for eternity, that one is chilling because, again, it went against her expectations. If you expect that when you die, you just cease to exist and something happens, that's terrifying. If you expect you're going to heaven and you end up in hell, terrifying as well. If you expect you're going to go to hell and you end up in heaven, pleasant surprise. But this is this woman's story from this paper here. And the paper is in the show notes. A woman who hemorrhaged from a ruptured fallopian tube reported a near-death experience involving, quote, horrific beings with gray gelatinous appendages grasping and clawing at me. So she basically, bam, she dies and she's surrounded by gray ooze monsters grabbing her body, reaching out, feeling her flesh. Not a good beginning to your death experience. Quote, the sounds of their guttural moaning and the indescribable stench still remain 41 years later. There was no benign being of light, no life video, nothing beautiful or pleasant. So she expected this vision. She expected this welcoming into the holy community, this creator, her father, her spiritual father, to greet her and say, welcome home. To see the past life experiences, to see all of the things that had happened to her, both good and bad, and to relive those things. Instead, she goes from being on an operating table to being grasped and clawed and held by creatures. Again, aliens. With no other word to describe them. Gelatinous, gray. And it's funny, it says appendages. It's not like she's actually seeing these things. It's almost just things coming out of a void or a reality attacking her. And the fact that this happened and she comes back to life, and 41 years later she can still remember the smell of them, shows how real that experience was to her, if not just real to begin with. Nobody knows what happens after you die. But these people have died. They didn't just fall asleep on a table. These people were clinically dead and came back to life. And the ones I went over we did 10 of these? Are a small sliver of near-death experiences. Are any of these experiences real? I think some of them are. So be careful out there. Whatever you're doing tonight, be a little more careful behind the wheel of your car. Double check that your shower mat is firmly stuck to your bathtub. And when you're walking through a dark room to go to the fridge to get something to drink late at night, just step a little more carefully. Because one simple mistake, and you could know for certain if any of these experiences are real. DeadRabbitRadio@gmail.com is going to be our email address. You can also hit us up at Facebook.com/DeadRabbitRadio. Twitter is @DeadRabbitRadio. Dead Rabbit Radio is the daily paranormal, conspiracy, and true crime podcast. You don't have to listen to it every day, but I'm glad you listened to it today. Have a great one, guys.